Rewrite needed. The glass doors of the Grand Hotel slid open with a gentle hum, letting in the vibrant pulse of the city just beyond. Chicago was alive with color, rhythm, and the kind of energy that could only belong to a city both historic and constantly reinventing itself. Taxis blared, tourists bustled, and banners for the International Book Festival flapped above the streets like kites in the breeze. Among the steady stream of travelers stood one man who moved with quiet command. Dressed in a tailored navy linen suit, his skin a rich, deep brown that glowed under the lobby's golden lights, he walked with the composure of someone who had spent a lifetime carrying himself through rooms that didn't always want him there. His name was Noah Cole. Noah didn't need to look around to know eyes were on him. He was used to it. Not just because of who he was, but because of what he represented. A best-selling author, global speaker, and activist who had stood at podiums from Johannesburg to New York, he had written words that had shaken systems and softened hearts. Still, in moments like this, he carried more than a suitcase. He carried history. The receptionist greeted him with a smile, already recognizing the name on the reservation. "Mr. Cole, welcome to the Grand Hotel," she said, reaching for the check-in tablet. "We're honored to have you with us for the festival." Noah nodded warmly, his voice smooth. "Thank you. It's good to be back." But before she could hand him the room key, a voice interrupted, sharp, nasal, and thick with disdain. "You've got to be kidding me." Noah didn't turn. He didn't need to. The air behind him had shifted, suddenly heavy with entitlement. Two men, mid-40s, red-faced, draped in polo shirts and arrogance, stepped closer. They weren't trying to be quiet. "Are we seriously letting anyone in here now?" The taller one muttered, loud enough for half the lobby to hear. "I mean, come on. This is a five-star hotel." Noah's grip on the suitcase handle didn't change. His posture didn't waver. But something inside him, the part that had heard it all before, stirred, quietly bracing. The receptionist froze, her smile faltering as the two men edged closer. Noah didn't move. He let the tension build around him, like smoke rising before a flame, but didn't feed it. He'd long ago learned the power of silence, how it forced the world to reveal itself. The shorter of the two men, balding and sunburned, scoffed loudly. "Bet he's not even a real guest. Probably wandered in off the street." The receptionist opened her mouth to respond, but Noah gently lifted his hand. "It's all right," he said, voice calm and low. "Let them speak." His tone wasn't dismissive. It was deliberate, measured. It told everyone in the room that he was not shaken. Not even slightly. "You know what's happening in this country?" the tall man continued, almost spitting the words. "Standards are falling. Can't even feel safe in a place like this anymore. No offense, buddy, but this ain't the kind of hotel for people like you." Noah turned to face them at last. His expression was unreadable, serene, even. He studied them the way a poet studies conflict, not with fear, but with the quiet intent to understand what ugliness looks like up close. "I believe the hotel staff can confirm my reservation," Noah said evenly, turning back to the receptionist. "Shall we proceed?" But the men wouldn't let it go. "Seriously?" the bald one barked. "You're just gonna let this guy stay here? Look at him. Come on, he's clearly lying." They stepped closer now, invading space they hadn't been invited into. "I'm calling the police," the tall one announced. "Let's see what they say when they get here. We'll find out if you're really who you say you are." There were murmurs from guests across the lobby. A man recording with his phone. A woman shaking her head in disgust. A staff member quietly moving toward security. And still, Noah stood rooted, solid as stone, calm as the tide. "Call them," he said softly. The taller man pulled out his phone with a dramatic flourish, as if expecting applause. He stabbed at the screen with trembling fingers, speaking loudly to the emergency operator. "Yes, I need officers sent to the Grand Hotel immediately," he said, pacing in front of the reception desk. "There's a suspicious man here, claiming to be a guest. He's harassing the staff, refusing to leave." Noah didn't flinch. He kept his gaze steady on the woman behind the counter, whose eyes darted between him and the two men. She looked mortified, her hands nervously gripping the edge of the desk. "I'm not refusing anything," Noah said, calm but clear. "I've simply asked to check into the room I reserved and paid for weeks ago." The shorter man leaned in. "Save it. You're probably using someone else's name. Or a fake credit card. Think you can just blend in with the rest of us?" Noah looked at him, not with anger, but with something far more unsettling, empathy. The kind that made a man see his own ugliness reflected back at him. "You don't know who I am," Noah said gently. "And that's okay. But you will. Security appeared near the entrance, two uniformed hotel guards, eyes scanning the tension in the lobby. One of them spoke quietly into a walkie-talkie. The receptionist, relieved, motioned to them. "These two guests are disturbing the check-in process," she said, her voice finally finding strength. "Mr. Cole has a confirmed reservation." "They do not." Still, the men scoffed. "Let's see what the police say. I bet they'll see through the act." Noah didn't speak. He stepped aside slightly, giving the growing crowd a clearer view, letting them see this moment, this familiar, brutal theater of accusation and dignity. He'd stood in scenes like this before, and he knew how to wait. The sound of sirens grew louder in the distance, echoing down the wide boulevard outside. The sirens cut through the heat of the afternoon, weaving past honking taxis and palm-lined sidewalks before halting just outside the glass doors of the Grand Hotel. A hush settled over the lobby as two uniformed officers stepped inside, scanning the room with sharp, practiced eyes. The taller white man, clearly emboldened, raised his hand like a student eager to be called on. "Officers. Over here. That's him, right there." Noah didn't move. "He's causing a disturbance," the man continued, refusing to leave, pretending to be someone he's not. The officers approached slowly, their eyes flicking between Noah and the two men. One of them, a younger officer with a clipped mustache and a name badge that read Souza, held up a hand. "Sir," he said to Noah, tone measured but professional, "may I ask your name?" "Noah Cole," he replied, his voice clear, his posture straight. "I have a reservation under that name. I've shown identification to the staff. I haven't raised my voice, threatened anyone, or broken any laws." The officer nodded and turned to the receptionist. "Can you confirm?" "Yes," she said quickly. "We've already verified his ID and reservation." These other men, she gestured toward the accusers, they interrupted the process and began harassing him. Officer Souza turned back to Noah. His brow furrowed slightly as recognition flickered behind his eyes. He leaned toward his partner, whispering something. His partner's eyes widened. "Noah Cole?" Souza cleared his throat and faced Noah again, more formally this time. "Mr. Cole? Are you the Noah Cole? Author of the Stones Remember?" "I am," Noah replied, with a trace of a smile. "Among other things." The officers looked at each other. The tone in the room shifted. The tall man's confidence began to fray. "Wait, what does that matter?" he asked, suddenly less certain. "We're the ones who called you. He's dangerous. Probably scammed his way in here." "No, sir," Officer Souza said firmly. "What you did was make a false report. And from what I'm hearing, you may have committed a hate crime." The shorter man stepped back, eyes darting. "This is insane. You're taking a side?" "We're not taking sides," the officer said, now stepping between the men and Noah. "We're doing our job." The lobby felt frozen in time. Conversations had ceased, footsteps halted. Even the soft music playing over the hotel speakers seemed distant now, overshadowed by the weight of the unfolding truth. Officer Souza turned slightly, eyes narrowing as he looked at the two men who had made the accusation. "You both claimed this man was impersonating someone, that he was aggressive, and that hotel staff were at risk. Yet the staff say otherwise. There are security cameras here. Witnesses. You understand the seriousness of filing a false police report, yes?" The taller man swallowed hard, suddenly looking much smaller. We just thought." "What exactly did you think?" Noah's voice cut in, not loud, not angry, but full of that devastating calm that left no room to hide. "That I didn't belong here? That someone like me couldn't possibly afford to stand where I'm standing?" The men didn't answer. "You saw my skin and decided my story for me," he continued. "That's not misunderstanding. That's not fear. That's hate dressed up as concern." Phones were out now. Guest recording, some whispering his name to each other as recognition spread like wildfire. "Noah Cole," someone said softly. "He's the one who wrote Let Me Breathe." Souza raised his voice. "I'm going to need your IDs," he said to the two men, his professional patience running thin. "We'll be taking formal statements downtown." The shorter man tried to protest, but we didn't know who he was. "That's the problem," Souza replied coldly. "You didn't care to." One of the hotel staff approached Noah quietly with a warm expression. "Sir, we've upgraded you to the presidential suite on the house, and we deeply apologize for what's happened here." Noah nodded slowly, offering the man a soft, "Thank you," before turning back toward the two who had tried to humiliate him. "You wanted to expose me," he said, "and in the end, you exposed yourselves." As the officers led the two men toward the exit, murmurs swept through the lobby like waves lapping at the shore. Some guests clapped quietly. Others simply watched in stunned silence, eyes locked on Noah, as if seeing him not just as a man, but as a mirror to something much larger than the moment. Noah didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply stood there, composed as ever, letting the stillness speak for him. That was the kind of power he had cultivated, not the kind that roared, but the kind that refused to be moved. He walked over to the front desk again, suitcase in hand. The receptionist gave him a look that was no longer just professional. It was personal, apologetic, and full of unspoken respect. "Mr. Cole, your suite is ready," she said, sliding a new keycard across the counter. "Please know this hotel stands with you. What happened here does not reflect who we are." Noah nodded. "I appreciate that." He turned and made his way to the elevator, flanked now by more eyes than before, some filled with shame, others with admiration. One young man near the elevators, barely 20, wearing a festival lanyard, stepped forward awkwardly. "Excuse me, Mr. Cole," he said, voice nervous but eager. "Your books changed how I see the world. I'm studying literature because of you. Speak, I listen. Thank you. For everything." Noah offered him a steady look and a small, warm nod. "Keep studying. The world needs new voices." The elevator dinged. As the doors opened, Noah stepped inside, finally alone for the first time since the storm began. He pressed the button for the top floor. The doors closed gently, shutting out the whispers, the phones, the eyes. And in the quiet that followed, he let out the breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Not because he was afraid, but because even now, after all his success, after all his years fighting for justice, the weight of having to prove his humanity still found a way to settle on his shoulders. But today, he had turned that weight into something else. Noah's suite was everything he had imagined. Luxurious, with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the sprawling city, the beach glimmering just beyond. The quiet hum of the city was distant, but here, in this moment of solitude, it was a reminder of how far he had come. He dropped his suitcase near the bed and went to the window, looking out over the city as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting a warm, golden glow across the skyline. The last rays of light flickered against the rooftops and glass towers, just as the words of his next speech began to form in his mind. He was already thinking ahead, already plotting the next conversation, the next book, the next way to fight for change. But then his phone buzzed on the side table. At first, he ignored it, too tired, too content in this rare moment of peace. But it buzzed again, insistent, the screen lighting up with a name that made his heart skip: Maria. His longtime friend and fellow activist. The one who had shared the front lines of protests and sit-ins. The one who had helped organize conferences for racial justice across the world. He picked up the phone and answered. "Hey, Maria." Noah, her voice was heavy with emotion. "Turn on the news." He furrowed his brow, glancing toward the television. "Why? What's? Just trust me." He reached for the remote, his fingers moving faster now. The screen flickered to life. Breaking news. Hotel incident sparks global outrage. Racial discrimination exposed. Noah watched, transfixed, as the footage from the lobby played. Images of the confrontation, the men accusing him, the police arriving, and then, his name being announced across the globe. There were clips of guests applauding, the hotel staff apologizing, and, finally, the two men being escorted out in handcuffs. Then, the reports took a turn. News outlets from all over the world were talking about the impact Noah's presence had in that moment. How his calm demeanor, his unwavering silence, had become a symbol of defiance against hate. Maria's voice came through again, softer now, but filled with pride. "Noah, do you see? This is bigger than just you. Your fight is reaching people in ways you never imagined." Noah swallowed, his chest tight. "I didn't want this to be about me, Maria. I just wanted to check into my room. And that's exactly why it is about you," she said. "Because you didn't let them break you. Because you stood up for yourself, and for everyone who's been silenced, who's been told they don't belong. You're making history, Noah. This isn't just about what happened at that hotel. It's about everything you've fought for, everything we're still fighting for." Noah leaned back against the window, staring out at the vast expanse of the city beneath him. His heart was heavy, but now, there was a sense of clarity, too. This was bigger than the incident. This was the story of a world that still had much to learn, and yet, it was a world that could be changed, one conversation at a time. He knew that tomorrow, the headlines would move on to something else. But the fight? The fight would continue. And he would continue to be a part of it. Noah Cole, the writer, the activist, the man who had stood silent in the face of hatred, was no longer just a name on the page. He was a symbol of something more. The next morning, Noah woke to the sound of his phone ringing, the bright sunlight pouring into his suite as if the city was already eager to keep moving forward. He glanced at the time, just past 8. He had barely slept, the weight of last night's events still pressing on his mind. But it wasn't the weight of defeat. It was something else, something that kept him awake, turned over in his thoughts, and deepened his resolve. He answered the phone, still half-dazed. Noah. Maria's voice was bright but urgent. You're trending. Everywhere. The hashtag Noah Cole is real is blowing up. It's all over social media. Noah sat up in bed, rubbing his eyes. What do you mean, trending? People are sharing their own stories, Maria explained. Stories of discrimination, of racism, of being judged for who they are. They're using your name as a rallying cry. It's like a chain reaction. Noah. Your silence, your dignity, it's giving them the courage to speak. Noah was quiet for a moment, absorbing her words. He had always known that the world was ready to listen, but this was different. This wasn't just about him anymore. This wasn't just a moment in time. This was the start of something that could echo for years to come. He pulled himself up from the bed and walked to the window again, gazing out at the city that had so quickly shifted from the quiet moments of yesterday to the fevered energy of today. What's the next step? Noah asked, already knowing the answer. Maria's voice softened, a knowing smile in her tone. You keep doing what you do best. Right. Speak. Share your truth. Because now, more than ever, people are ready to hear it. Noah nodded, turning from the window to the desk in the corner. His laptop sat there, its screen dark. The keys had been waiting for him, just like his readers had been, just like the world had always been. He knew what he had to do. And this time, it wasn't just for him. It was for everyone who had been pushed down, silenced, or ignored. It was for every single person who, like him, had been made to feel less than because of the color of their skin, the shape of their name, or the sound of their voice. The world had given him a platform. And now, more than ever, it was time to use it. Noah sat down at the desk and opened his laptop. He typed the first line with certainty. It's time we stopped waiting for change to come. It's time we made it happen. And with that, the words began to flow faster, stronger, more urgent than ever before. He was no longer just an author. He was a catalyst. Noah spent the next few hours locked in the flow of writing, his fingers dancing over the keys as if they were the only thing in the world. The world outside his suite, the festival, the thousands of people faded into the background. It was just him and the words, filling the screen with an urgency he hadn't felt in years. He could hear the echo of his own voice in his head, the same calm, unwavering tone he had used in the hotel lobby. The fight for justice doesn't stop. It's just beginning. The article he wrote that morning wasn't the one he had originally planned. It wasn't the book he had set out to finish. Instead, it was a rallying cry, a call to action, a message to the world that no one could silence him, not now, not ever. By the time he finished, the sun was setting again, the golden light spilling into the suite like it had the day before. But now, Noah was a man reborn, a man who had just poured his heart into a piece of writing that would reach millions. He knew it wouldn't be easy. He knew that there would be pushback, that there would be those who would try to dismiss his words or tear them apart. But he also knew something else. He had the truth on his side. And in the end, that truth would be undeniable. He hit send, watching as the article shot into the digital world. A message to the silent. We are all heroes in the fight for equality. It was out there now. His words were no longer just his own. They belonged to everyone who had ever been dismissed, ignored, or silenced. They were for the people who had faced the kind of hatred he had endured in the hotel lobby and every day before it. As he closed his laptop and sat back, a knock came at the door. He stood up, stretching his back, and opened it to find a young hotel employee standing there with a tray of food. Mr. Cole, the man said, his voice respectful and kind. The hotel wanted to send you a small gift. We deeply regret what happened yesterday. Noah smiled warmly. Thank you. I appreciate it. The man hesitated, then added, Sir, I just wanted to say. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for what happened. I was too scared to speak up before. Noah looked at him, understanding the quiet shame in his eyes. He stepped aside to let him in. It's okay, he said softly. What matters is that you're speaking up now. It's never too late. The man nodded and left, closing the door behind him. Noah turned back to the window, the weight of the day still heavy on his chest, but now it was a different kind of weight. It was the weight of possibility, of change, of voices that were finally being heard. He took a deep breath and turned back to his desk. He was ready for the next step. He was ready to speak even louder. The next morning, Noah woke up to the sound of his phone vibrating against the nightstand. He groggily reached for it, squinting at the bright screen. There were dozens of notifications, messages, mentions, retweets. The article he had posted the night before had gone viral. But it wasn't just the article that was catching fire, it was everything that had followed. In the hours since he'd published the piece, his inbox had flooded with messages of support. Readers from around the world were sharing their own stories of discrimination, recounting moments where they, too, had been judged before they had even spoken. And not just people who looked like him, but people of all races, ages, and backgrounds. They were all standing together, sharing their pain, their anger, and their hopes. One message stood out from the rest. It was a video from a young woman in South Africa who had clearly spent the night composing her thoughts. "Mr. Cole," she began, tears streaming down her face. "I don't have your strength. I'm not sure I ever will. But I want you to know that you've given me the courage to speak. I've been silent for so long, hiding my truth because I was afraid it wouldn't matter. But after reading your words, I see now that my voice does matter. It's not too late to change things. It's not too late to speak up." Noah watched the video, his heart swelling with both pride and sorrow. She wasn't alone. The floodgates had opened, and the world was finally speaking up, just as he had. He set the phone down and walked to the window again, gazing at the city below. The view hadn't changed since yesterday, yet everything felt different. The weight of history, the burden of centuries of injustice, it hadn't gone away. But now, there was something new in the air. Hope. Possibility. The feeling that maybe, just maybe, the world was beginning to shift. The festival was set to begin in a few hours, but no one knew that what had happened the day before, what had unfolded in the lobby of the hotel, was the beginning of something far greater. His name was no longer just tied to his books or his activism. It was becoming a symbol for something larger, a movement. A movement of voices long silenced, now rising up in unison. Noah smiled to himself as he picked up his suit jacket and headed out the door. He wasn't just attending the festival anymore. He was part of something much bigger. And it was just the beginning. The grand ballroom of the conference center was filled with the hum of conversations, the clink of glasses, and the rustling of velvet and silk. Hundreds of people, writers, activists, thinkers, and influencers milled about, exchanging ideas and discussing the latest trends in literature and social justice. But despite the buzz around him, Noah Cole felt more centered than he had in a long time. He was supposed to be just another speaker at the festival, just another author, sharing his latest work. But after yesterday's events, the room felt different. He felt different. The very air seemed charged with anticipation, as if everyone was waiting for something to happen. Maria had warned him about the weight of the moment. "It's not just about your speech, Noah. You're a beacon now. People are looking to you for direction, for inspiration." He hadn't fully understood what she meant until now. As he stepped onto the stage to take his place at the podium, the crowd fell silent, eerily so. He could feel the weight of their gaze, but it wasn't hostile. It wasn't judgment. It was something more powerful. It was expectation. Noah adjusted the microphone and cleared his throat, his gaze sweeping across the audience. He saw faces filled with curiosity, admiration, and maybe even a bit of fear. People were still processing what had happened in the lobby. They had seen the video. They had read his article. They had watched him stand tall in the face of hatred and emerge victorious. And now, they wanted to hear what he had to say. He took a deep breath, feeling the rush of words rising within him. "I don't often speak about my own experiences," he began, his voice steady. "In fact, I never wanted to. I thought, maybe if I stayed quiet, I could keep my focus on the bigger picture, on the work that matters, the words that need to be heard. But yesterday, something changed. And today, something more needs to be said." The crowd was silent, hanging on every word. "You see, I've spent my life writing for change, writing to open minds and hearts. But what I realized yesterday is that it's not enough to just write. It's not enough to just speak. Sometimes, we have to do more. We have to stand in the face of injustice and say, I'm not going anywhere. We have to remind the world that our voices matter, even when they try to silence us." Noah paused, his eyes scanning the room. He could see the impact of his words in their eyes, the way they leaned forward, the way they were listening with every fiber of their being. "Every one of us carries a story," he continued. "And those stories deserve to be heard. Not because they are convenient. Not because they fit into the narrative of those who hold power. But because we are all human. We are all worthy of dignity and respect. And as long as we are alive, we must fight for that. Fight for the right to be seen, heard, and valued." He could feel his heart beating in his chest now, the adrenaline coursing through him. He was speaking not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever felt marginalized, dismissed, or oppressed. "I stand before you today not just as an author or an activist," he said, his voice strong, his shoulders squared, "but as a human being. And I am here to tell you that we are not just a collection of struggles. We are a force for change. And together, we are unstoppable." The room erupted into applause. Noah stepped back from the podium, feeling the weight of the moment settle in his bones. This was why he wrote. This was why he fought. This was why their voices would never be silenced again. After Noah's speech, the energy in the room didn't fade. If anything, it became electric. Conversations erupted, people clapped him on the back, and journalists rushed forward to ask for interviews. But Noah, in his usual quiet confidence, deflected most of the attention. He didn't need their praise. What mattered was the ripple effect his words had set in motion. Maria found him standing by the large windows, looking out over the city. The setting sun painted the skyline in shades of orange and pink. "You were brilliant," she said, her voice full of pride. Noah smiled faintly but shook his head. "I didn't do this for the applause, Maria. This is just the beginning. This is the starting point. The real work starts now." Maria studied him, sensing the seriousness in his tone. "You know that your words are reaching people beyond the festival, right? There's already talk of a global movement. You've become the face of something much bigger than just one speech, Noah. People are organizing. They're mobilizing. They're asking how they can help." Noah nodded. He knew. He could feel the weight of it, but it didn't overwhelm him. It motivated him. He turned back to face her. "And that's exactly why I have to be ready. I've been speaking for years, but now the world is listening. And they're waiting for action. I'm not just talking about equality anymore. I'm talking about systemic change. I'm talking about holding the people in power accountable. I'm talking about building a new world." Maria smiled softly, her eyes glowing with understanding. "You've always been a writer, Noah. But today, you became a leader." The truth of her words sank in as the night unfolded around him. The conversations, the interviews, the media coverage, everything was pointing toward one undeniable reality. The story of what happened at the Grand Hotel was no longer just about a confrontation in a hotel lobby. It was about something far more significant. It was about society's unwillingness to acknowledge and confront the everyday realities of racism, discrimination, and inequality. Later that evening, Noah returned to his suite, tired but determined. He knew that when he stepped out of the hotel the next morning, the world would be watching, waiting. It would be tempting to shy away from the weight of it all, to retreat into the comfort of his words and his books. But Noah wasn't that man anymore. He was ready for the next chapter. He took a seat at his desk, his fingers itching to write. He had a book to finish, but now it wasn't just the story of his life. It was the story of every person who had ever been told they didn't belong. It was the story of the fight for justice, the fight for humanity, the fight for change. The sun had set, but the work had only just begun. The morning after his speech, the city seemed different. The sunlight streamed through the windows of Noah's suite with an almost prophetic clarity, casting long shadows over the streets below. It was as though the world had been waiting for this moment of change, and now that it had arrived, everything was aligning. Yet, despite the surreal feeling of it all, Noah knew that this was just the calm before the storm. Noah had already received dozens of requests for interviews, guest appearances, and collaborations. The hashtag #NoahColeIsReal continued to trend globally, sparking online forums, discussions, and petitions in support of racial equality and justice. But as he glanced at his phone, the overwhelming number of messages felt more like a call to action than a celebration. The world was watching, yes, but more importantly, it was talking. People had seen the injustice. They had witnessed the courage, and they were demanding change. But amidst the noise and the attention, Noah understood one thing. The true test was not in the applause, not in the viral videos, but in how he could use this momentum to drive real, lasting change. As he walked into the hotel lobby, he was greeted by many of the same faces that had witnessed the chaos just a day before. The staff gave him polite nods, some with gratitude in their eyes. Noah had become a symbol to them, but also to the guests who had been watching from the sidelines. A man who had been accused, harassed, and dismissed, and yet had turned the situation around with nothing more than dignity, strength, and truth. He wasn't just an author anymore. He was a beacon, a representation of all those who had ever been told they didn't belong. As he exited the hotel, a small crowd gathered around him. Journalists, activists, fans, all eager to speak to him. The sun was warm, and the air was thick with anticipation. He could feel the weight of the moment on his shoulders, but it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a responsibility. "Mr. Cole," a journalist called out, holding a microphone. "How do you plan to move forward now that your message has resonated globally?" Noah paused, the crowd growing quieter as they waited for his answer. "The message," he said, his voice calm but firm, "has always been the same. We must confront the systems that perpetuate racism, inequality, and injustice. Yesterday, I was a man in a hotel lobby. But today, I stand as part of a global movement. We must keep speaking, keep fighting, Keep demanding a world where everyone is treated with dignity and respect. The crowd murmured, the weight of his words sinking in. He could see people nodding, some with tears in their eyes. This wasn't just an interview. This wasn't just a soundbite. This was history in the making. Noah stepped into the waiting car, his heart still pounding from the exchange. Maria was there, sitting quietly beside him. "You did it," she said softly, her voice filled with pride. "It's not over," Noah replied, gazing out the window. "It's only just beginning." The journey ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be obstacles, backlash, and more battles to fight. But Noah knew one thing for sure. The world had already started to change, and it was never going back. As the car drove through the streets, Noah allowed himself a rare moment of peace. The fight for justice was long, but now, more than ever, it had momentum. And this time, it wasn't just one man leading the charge. It was a movement. Days turned into weeks, and the world's eyes remained fixed on Noah Cole. What had started as a singular moment of confrontation in a luxury hotel lobby had blossomed into a global movement, fueled by his words and the outpouring of support that followed. But for Noah, the victory wasn't just in the viral fame or the messages of solidarity. It was in the change he could see beginning to unfold, however small. He traveled from city to city, giving speeches at conferences, meeting with leaders in politics and human rights organizations, and participating in panel discussions. The media coverage was relentless and at times overwhelming. But Noah wasn't here for the spotlight. He was here to shift the conversation, to force people to reckon with the systems of oppression that had kept so many silenced for so long. Maria, who had become not only his closest confidant, but also his strategic partner, was always there by his side. She managed his schedule, fielded requests, and ensured he was centered and focused. She knew Noah well enough to understand that while he thrived on making an impact, the constant attention could wear him down. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of interviews and speaking engagements, they found themselves sitting in a quiet cafe in Sao Paulo, away from the prying eyes of cameras. Noah had finally allowed himself a moment to breathe, taking in the ambience of the dimly lit space and the soft clinking of coffee cups. The weight of the world felt just a little lighter here. "You're doing more than you even realize, Noah," Maria said, breaking the comfortable silence. "The ripple effects are real. I've heard from local activists in small communities, from grassroots organizations. They're saying your story, your voice, it's empowering them to take their own stand." Noah took a slow sip of his coffee, his gaze distant as he thought about her words. He appreciated the acknowledgement, but he also knew that true change wasn't about the big speeches or the media attention. It was about what happened after the spotlight had faded, after the applause had died down. "I know," he said softly, "but it's not enough yet. Not by a long shot." Maria gave him a knowing look. She had seen him struggle with this feeling before, this idea that no matter how far he went, no matter how much he accomplished, it would never be enough. But she also knew that it was what drove him forward. "You're right," she replied. "But don't lose sight of how far we've come. The world is different because of you." Noah leaned back in his chair, his fingers tracing the edge of his coffee cup. His mind was always working, always planning the next step in the fight for justice. The movement was growing, yes, but it had to be sustained. The true measure of success wouldn't be in the viral moments, but in the long-term changes that followed. As he looked around the cafe, he saw people living their lives, unaware of the battle he had just fought and the one still to come. But he knew this fight wasn't just his. It was for everyone. Every person who had ever been told their dreams didn't matter, every soul who had felt the sting of prejudice, every voice that had been silenced by fear. He was fighting for them, too. "Sometimes," Noah said, breaking the quiet again, "I wonder if I'm enough to make the difference I want to see. But then I remember, it's not just about me. It's about all of us. It's about creating a world where no one has to ask that question. A world where every voice matters." Maria smiled at him. "That's why you're leading this fight. Because you understand that better than anyone." Noah sat in the quiet for a moment, the gravity of it all settling in. This wasn't just a story of one man standing up in the face of injustice. This was the story of millions coming together, of voices that had been ignored rising up in unison. It was the beginning of a movement, one that would take years to shape, but one that would, in the end, change everything. The road ahead would be long and difficult. There would be more battles to fight, more systems to dismantle, more lives to impact. But Noah wasn't afraid. He had stepped into this fight with everything he had, and he was prepared to stay for as long as it took. Because in the end, it wasn't just his voice the world needed to hear, it was the voices of all those who had been pushed to the margins. And together, they would make the change that the world so desperately needed. The movement continued to grow, its roots spreading deep into communities across the globe. Noah's voice, once confined to the pages of his books and the walls of crowded auditoriums, had become the rallying cry for a generation committed to justice. The conversations were no longer just about his personal triumph, they were about a collective fight for a better world. As the months passed, Noah found himself working not only with activists, but with legislators, educators, and community leaders. They organized peaceful protests, lobbied for policy changes, and created spaces where people could share their stories and experiences. But Noah knew that the real work was never easy. The fight for justice had to be constant, and it was going to require more than just words. One day, while meeting with a coalition of leaders in New York, Noah received a call that made his heart skip a beat. It was a message from Maria, who had just been informed that the United Nations had invited him to speak at the upcoming General Assembly. They wanted him to address global leaders on racial equality and human rights. The invitation felt surreal, but as Noah sat there, processing the weight of it, he realized that it was a moment years in the making. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the millions who had stood with him, whose lives had been affected by the work they had started together. This was the next step, and it had never felt more important. But as he sat down later that evening, pen in hand, preparing his speech for the UN, Noah reflected on everything that had led him here. He thought about the night at the Grand Hotel, the hatred and the fear he had confronted. He thought about the quiet moments of doubt, when he wondered if his words would make a difference. And now, with the world at his feet, he understood. It was never just about what he could accomplish on his own. It had always been about what could be achieved when people united for a common cause. As he wrote, his words flowed with a sense of purpose, a deep conviction he hadn't fully known he had until now. He wasn't just speaking to the world's leaders, he was speaking to every person who had ever been told they didn't belong, every person who had ever been pushed to the sidelines. "We are not here to be invisible," he wrote. "We are not here to be silent. We are here to build a world that acknowledges our worth, where we are no longer defined by the color of our skin or the barriers others place before us. We are here to fight for a world where dignity is a right, not a privilege." When the day of the General Assembly arrived, Noah stood before the global leaders with a calm composure. The world was watching him, but more than that, they were listening. And for the first time, Noah felt a true sense of peace. Not because the world had changed, but because the conversation had started, and it was no longer stopping. His journey hadn't ended. In many ways, it was only just beginning. But he knew now that change was possible, not because of any one person, but because of the countless voices that had joined his. The movement was no longer just his. It was everyone's. As the applause echoed in the hall that day, Noah couldn't help but smile, knowing that a new world was being born, one where, finally, the voices of the unheard were being given the space they had always deserved. And this time, they would never be silenced again.